go at the podium, or you can, okay. These are all ready to go. So when the panel's wrapping up, you can say, it's time for a couple of questions. If you want to take questions, but we can, bad guy will say, hey, we have Sally. Right? Right. I need a little ding ding, you know? Oh, it's not very loud. I need a half-filled one. Having a hard time with the ding. The ding isn't working. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for being here. I am so delighted. I was just in a room, well, we will introduce them shortly, with these three amazing leaders. And I think we talked about how rarely we're all in a room together. And yet the number of sort of shared interests and shared projects that was just circling around was quite incredible. As you all know, the inspiration for doing this was the election of the amazing American Pope Leo XIV, a Chicago Southsider. He announced the World Day of the Poor. I believe it's the 8th one. It was started by Pope Francis. It's this Sunday. And I reached out to these three amazing leaders and said, we would love to honor our new Pope from Chicago and honor this World Day of the Poor. And all three of them answered like in less than 10 seconds and said they would do it, which is just, you know, thank you very much for that sign of respect and for that willingness to be here in the name of this bigger issue of how do we care for the poor. We've got some people joining us over live stream because we were sold out. And I just want to say that Cardinal Supich would have been here as well as all our auxiliary bishops. But it turns out it's the week of the United Conference of Bishops. So the Cardinal sends his good wishes and thanks everybody for joining in the spirit. I want to thank all the amazing friends and board members of all of the organizations, Metro Family Services. Let's hear it for Metro Family Services. Right. Friends and family of Big Shoulders. The amazing Greater Chicago Food Depository. Catholic Charities. Woo! All right. Ann Kelly Williams from our board is going to lead us in a prayer, and then we're going to encourage you all to eat while we start talking. I have a feeling we are not going to have a hard time between the conversation among the four of us, as well as when we open it up for questions, to having a very robust discussion for the next hour, and we're super excited for it. So please, Ann, join us, lead us in prayer, and we will let the fun begin.
Loving God, open your banquet to all, to single parents striving for stability, to survivors of domestic violence seeking safety and shelter, to seniors longing for companionship, to immigrants holding hope for new beginnings, and to neighbors burdened by struggles we cannot see. Your table is truly for all. May those facing hunger and housing insecurity find connection and nourishment. Because joy is found in the community of God, may we build it alongside those who are afraid, lonely, and isolated. And because you are love itself, may the organizations and leaders gathered here live their missions with love. In your holy name we pray. Amen.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne. We have just a few slides to set the stage to get a shared fact base, though I figure across the boards and friends of these four organizations, people should know a lot of facts about poverty. But the idea is that we would get a few basics on the table, but we are starting out with, we cannot regard the poor simply as a societal problem. They are part of us, they are part of our family, and I think all of the leaders and organizations represented here today live by that ethos. In case you didn't know it, we always share at Catholic Charities the income inequality data. As a business school professor, I actually put it in every single one of my courses, is that absent redistribution, and I understand there's an important role for redistribution, especially SNAP, which is going to come up today. If you correct the last 50 years of income for inflation, what you can see on the left-hand side is the bottom 20% of households. That red line has basically been flat during the greatest economic expansion over the last 50 years. The next quintile has been just about flat as well. So 40% of our country the households live on less than $50,000 a year. And it's a little better in the next quintile. And the only group that's really seen growth during this massive economic expansion has been the last 20%. And if we isolate that to the top line, which is the 5%, and then we don't even have a chart big enough to show the economic expansion for the top 1%. So this amazing economy is outstanding at creating jobs and outstanding at creating capital, but we have not been able to create jobs that themselves are going to give equal amounts of dignity to every hard worker. And that's a lot of what the folks here are committed to working on. And that's why we care a lot about things like transfer payments that'll get talked about. This map you have seen in many different versions. I've seen it in Kate's presentations. I've seen it in Josh's and Rick's. But this is a map of poverty across Cook and Lake counties, because the Archdiocese does both of them. And the darker the blue, the darker the level of poverty in those neighborhoods. And you can see that no part of our region is immune, but especially the south and the west sides of Chicago into the southern suburbs, we're seeing an increasing amounts of poverty pushing down there. At Catholic Charities, we estimate that 2 million people, 40%, that those two flat quintiles struggle to afford basic essentials. And we've got some of the actual poverty data, but if they're not already in poverty, they are a paycheck away, because the research shows that if you're in that bottom 40%, you have very little savings. And so if something happens to your job, or your car gets broken, or you lose a family member and have to pay for burial or something like that, it can be a very destabilizing event. The facts behind some of the poverty, what this shows you is about 385,000 people live in extreme poverty. Another 372 in the region are below the poverty line. And then we go to 150%, 185%, and 200. And they talk about the benefits cliff, because at about 185, that's where you lose your eligibility for many of the government safety net programs. But again, all of these families are still earning less than $50,000 a year and trying to make a life work in our country. Above 200% is considered a livable income, but again, that's only it's still roughly 50 to 60,000 for a family of four. Kate, I feel like, is there anything I need to add to this list for you? You study this data so much. You're good? All right. Poverty disproportionately affects seniors who live alone, Black and Latino households, and those led by single mothers. 17% of children, some estimates as high as 20%, live in poverty. 35% of families led by single mothers, whereas it's only 15% for single fathers and only 6% for intact families. And then 27% of seniors living alone versus those who live in community. And of course, the data we see over and over is the disproportionate representation of Black and Latino households compared to white households when it comes to poverty. When people struggle economically, there are three kinds of safety nets that we all lean on. And the point that's going to be made today is the government is the disproportionately largest safety net. Depending on where you live in the country, 70 to 90% of the safety net is government funded. So while everyone in this room and all the amazing donors are quite incredible, There is no way that we can make up philanthropically for the massive safety net that was created coming out of the World War II sort of democratic push in the 1960s and 70s to put these transfer payments in place. And as you can see from the income data, there was probably a wisdom to wanting to do that because not all boats were being lifted, to using the old JFK term. But it's important to realize it's both our safety net, but also the extended family safety net is very important in the modern world. We're seeing more and more people in their 20s living with their parents because they actually can't live independently. And that's not just in the lowest quintiles. We're seeing that in the middle quintiles as well. But the importance of understanding that there are 3 safety nets operating, but that by far the government safety net is the largest. 100 million people in the US, roughly nearly 1 out of every 3 participate in some kind of safety net program. That could include unemployment and some of the earned income tax credits and things like that. But it is just incredible the scale and scope of the safety net. So when we talk about repealing it, when people talk about making it go away, that there's a lot of fat, you know, every system has some inefficiency, but if we make it go away, it will dramatically impact our economy. And it will dramatically impact the lives of roughly a third of our neighbors, not just in Chicago, but across the country. And the last one that's hope-filled is, those are the statistics about poverty, right? But what's hope-filled is all of the amazing people who are here today, supporters, friends of the organizations, the leaders who are here today. I am the newcomer. I have only been at my job 5 years. These guys have each been in the field. They've been leaders for at least 20 years in major institutions, fighting these issues, you know, making the world a better place. Together, we serve more than 1.5 million people a year across these 4 organizations. We distribute over $750 million in goods and services for the region. We partner with over 1,000 local community organizations, not to mention each other. We were talking about one of the biggest messages we want to have come across today is the importance of partnership across all our organizations. And yet the reality is there's a lot of government funding that we rely on. Only about 20, maybe 30% of the work we do is privately funded compared to the government donations and in-kind, government funding and in-kind donations across our organizations. So we live this thing of weaving private philanthropy in with the government funding to make the system in our region work. All right, so that is the baseline. I'm a professor. Any questions on the data or the slides? All right. Well, let me go ahead, though, with that down, because I'm much more interested in getting the discussions by our speakers here. We've got Kate from the Greater Chicago Food Depository, Executive Director and CEO, named in 2006. So you are about to have your 20th anniversary, which is kind of amazing, kind of amazing. You now oversee the creation and growth of innovation at the Greater Chicago Food Depository. Any number of amazing innovations. One of the ones, is the Nourish Project, a $75 million initiative completed in 2024 to upgrade infrastructure and expand capacity. And you added over 38,000 square feet at that time for a prepared meal center that serves over 10,000 meals daily. That's pretty amazing. Rick, CEO of Metro Family Services since your appointment in 2011, though you held key government roles and did key leadership work at the Erie House for many, many years before then. You've played a major role in more than quadrupling revenue and impacting the lives of more than 200,000 families, 80% of whom are working poor or lower middle class. I was going to say he grew his budget from 100 to over 200, but he tells me that when he came to Metro, it was 37 million. And now you are almost 250 million in scale. Is that correct? 210, sorry. I was giving you even more credit. All right. But unbelievable leader in the community who just led the United for Chicago, getting a whole group of people together to sign and put out press conferences and all sorts of social media about what's happening with ICE and the immigrant challenges. And then, of course, there's a wonderful president, last but not least, president and CEO of Big Shoulders Fund. Again, you've been in your role 20 years too, if I'm not mistaken. You have a 20-year celebration. Maybe you two should have like a birthday party together next year. You have increased, you have like tripled the size of your organization, I think, since you joined it. And in 2020, as many of you know, the incredibly brave initiative the Big Shoulders took on when you agreed to take on the 38 Big Shoulders plus high need schools. And you made a 10-year, $100 million commitment in some of the toughest neighborhoods in our city to make sure we have the housing we need. So amazing, amazing leaders. I could go on and on. All right. Now that we've got the intros, I can sit because they're going to do the work. I'm going to start with Kate because we're going to have her talk about food, because obviously we've got food, we've got education, we've got wraparound services, violence prevention, everything's represented here. But Kate, I know there are a lot of pressing things on your mind about food. Where do things stand today? What is going on with staff? What do we need to know about how we have to be present in this moment about food, not just in the current shutdown crisis, but what's coming over the next 6 months?
Thank you for that. And before I answer, I just want to, we tried to give you a shout out, Sally. I want to give another just round of applause. Let's do it. No, you were there for me, Josh. Sally's not kidding. At the risk of delaying the program today, we were up in the room just yakking. And we are a group of individuals who love working with each other. And it just feels like an incredible privilege to be here in this space, but with all of you. And it's so funny. I'm seeing all of these connections. There are many people in the room who have many connections with all of us. And so that just feels like an incredible gift, particularly, as you know, it is a heavy time. And for those of you who are really close to the food depository and what is happening right now with the impact to SNAP and the government shutdown, you know that it is a particularly heavy time. We are feeling the weight of what our neighbors are experiencing, and we're seeing it firsthand. So let me just level set. Sally did an amazing job level setting on poverty. And I want to just take a step and talk for a moment about food insecurity. And I'll start by saying it's so important that you understand the poverty data, because there is a myth out there that hunger in America is a supply chain problem. If we could only unlock more food, we would take care of the hunger problem. And while it is certainly true, every human being, regardless of what your income is, every human being needs to eat 3 meals a day. It is not supply chain that causes the problem. It's poverty. What we see is that we have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people just here in Cook County who do everything right. They are working many jobs. But when they get to the end of the month, they have just enough money in their bank account to make the decision between, do I pay the rent or do I go to the grocery store? And because we have this amazing volunteer grassroots network of food pantries, people, families are able to make that decision to pay their rent. And that keeps them housing secure. But what we have seen as a steady change since 2008 and the Great Recession is that increasingly working families are having to use the emergency food system, not as an emergency, but really as a sustaining way of connecting resources month to month to month. So today, the people who we describe as food insecure in our community, and this is true across the country, these are people who are employed. These are people who are working not just a part-time job, they are fully employed and often with multiple jobs in the household. The challenge that we see is that wages are stagnant. And so if you work full-time and you are only bringing home $35,000 a year, you are not a poverty statistic. You may not qualify for parts of the safety net. And yet the best evidence, the best data would suggest that for a household of 4 in Chicago, you would probably need close to $60,000 a year to be able to pay for everything, which is why people are turning to food pantries in extraordinary numbers. And that was true before the moment that we were in. The second point that I want to make, and I feel like if I do retire from the Greater Chicago Food Depository, I have been here a long time, I want to go and be the publicist for the SNAP program, although I may have missed my calling. I should have done that a little bit earlier. SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It is what is often referred to as the food stamp program, same program. The name was changed about 20 years ago. And it is a magnificent program. And what is so heartbreaking in this moment is it is actually a program that works brilliantly. Milton Friedman used to hold it up as actually one of the best examples of government working well. It has very low fraud. It is very targeted. It gets immediately to the people who need it. And those dollars that are invested each month go immediately into businesses at the local level. What happened when the government shut down in October is unprecedented. And there are all sorts of judges that are weighing in on this or are now deciding that they won't weigh in on this. But it seems fairly clear that the USDA could have continued funding the SNAP program. And in fact, at the beginning of the shutdown, they announced that they would keep funding the SNAP program, but somewhere along the line made a decision to not. And what we saw immediately, people falling into deep need. And so as wonderful as this charitable response is, and we are all so proud, we all had some involvement in the charitable food response in this community. For every meal that the food pantries and food banks in this country make possible, for every one meal, the SNAP program provides 9. We cannot become 9 times bigger. The food pantries in basements of churches on the south side and the west side that are run by 85-year-old volunteers, they cannot become 9 times bigger. And I actually don't think we want them to be 9 times bigger. That's not the role of charity. I think the role of charity is to fill in the gaps. I think it is the role of government to do what we collectively cannot do individually and to ensure the most vulnerable are protected. That is the moment that we are in. We have seen skyrocketing need. And I'll just say, this is going on way too long, and so I'm gonna pause and give the microphone back to you, Sally, but I will just say it's because of many people in this room that we have been able to rise up and respond. We know there are 900,000 people in Cook County who lost SNAP benefits on November 1. We haven't been able to meet every one of those 900,000 people. We think we have been able to reach people in the most extreme set of circumstances, but the gap is big and there is a world of hurt out there, and it will take a while for us to get through the crisis. And I'll tease this, there is much more to come. The bill that was signed into law in July essentially fundamentally changes the SNAP program as it has existed, and it will leave hundreds of thousands of people in our state without food stamps. So I'll pause there.
I just want to do 2 quick follow-up questions. Okay, one is, I was very floored. I think you have actually reached far less than even 100,000 of those 900 so far, correct? With your outreach efforts to get the food in their hands?
Of the additional, we know that the first full week of the crisis, there were 202, I'm gonna look at my colleagues who are on the same call, I think it was 202,000 households that visited the emergency food system the last week of October.
Okay,
So we're, and probably 3 to 4 people in a household. So close to 1 million people reached. Not all of those are food stamp eligible though, right? So
Right.
that's where you see the difference. It's the additional distributions that we are doing. I'll call out Ronnie and the amazing students at St. Francis de Sales, which was one of the emergency sites that was stood up in the last 10 days. So there are some additional sites that are distributing to families in need. And it's there that we are really trying to get people who haven't come into the emergency food system previously.
Okay. Last question is, you have a wonderful statistic about the economic impact of the SNAP spending, that it actually generates, GDP. So if you could just share that statistic too, I think it's
Yes.
super important.
So one of the worries, I have a lot of worries right now. I know that there are literally, as we are sitting here, so first of all, 2/3 of the people on SNAP are children, older adults, or people living with a disability. So this idea that somehow they just need to go and get employment, I actually don't think 10-year-olds should have jobs. I don't think that people who are 85 years old should have a job. I really don't. I think we are better than that. And so I just want to be super clear about who is on SNAP. Of that remaining group, most of them are employed. They already have gotten their jobs. So they are earning so little that they qualify for a benefit. So that's just one thing I think that's super important to say. But part of the power of SNAP, it's highly stimulative. So just a fun fact, when the financial crisis of 2007 began, the very, very first thing that the Bush administration did is they expanded the SNAP program. They understood in times of economic crisis, you need to start the economy going. And it is such a targeted, stimulative way. And that's how SNAP has been used. It's really effective because every dollar of SNAP generates about $1.70 in economic income. So among the calls that we are getting at the Greater Chicago Food Depository, certainly neighbors who are worried about how they are going to feed themselves and their families, certainly community partners who are worried because the food pantry line is now going all the way down the street, certainly other partners who do critical work wondering how they can be a part of the response. But we are also getting panicked phone calls from grocery stores, from food manufacturers, from farmers who understand this is going to impact them too. There is a national retailer who I will not name, who 20% of their business comes in the form of SNAP, right? That is a big line, and the grocery industry is a small margin industry. So there is no question that when we start talking about pulling back from SNAP, we are going to feel a host of implications from that go well beyond the families that we're talking about. We will see businesses close. Those businesses will have to lay people off. They will order less food from manufacturers. It will go all the way to the American farmer who will feel that impact.
Thank you, Kate. All right, it is hard to follow Kate for anybody. Let's be clear. Rick, you were scheduled to do it, and if anybody can do it, I think Rick and Josh can. So we are going to pivot from food for a moment, and we are going to go around to things like mental health, community violence, senior housing and support, rapid rehousing, financial emergency assistance, a whole, a lot of like Catholic Charities and Metro Family Services do a lot with immediate needs, mothers and families, seniors and housing. But you, again, also the violence prevention. I'll let you add anything else you want. But as you look out in the current environment, taking into account SNAP, but what do you see as the unique challenges facing our communities of need in Chicago? And what does Metro Family Services think this group needs to know about the face of poverty?
Sally, thank you. Did you hear me? All right, well, we're gonna let Josh handle that since he's gonna follow Kate. Yeah, nobody wants to follow, nobody wants to follow Kate. So. Hi, everyone. You've heard my name, Rick Estrada. I think before I answer all those questions, I just want to introduce myself in a little different way than whatever it says out there. So I was brought to the country when I was 7 years old as a undocumented immigrant child. That my parents lived in Englewood, and that's where they first made their home. There's a community in Englewood even back then. It seems like ancient history in 1974. That's when we came to the country and, but by the time I came, we were living in a basement in Little Village. And so you all know what's going on in Little Village. And I think it's important for us to one, see the face of an undocumented immigrant from Little Village, given what's going on today, and over the last couple of months in Little Village and the trauma that they're suffering at the hands of our government. So I want to start there. And then, so the second thing is, I think I know poverty. So, but I didn't understand it until I came to Loyola. And we were at some sociology class, a 101 class, and they were putting up data like Sally did in the beginning, and they're talking about the income brackets. And I started to think about what my dad made and his checks and the yearly income. And I knew that because I had to fill out my own FAFSA at the time. And I'm like, oh crap, I was poor. I'm like, I'm poor. But I didn't know that at the time. And I'm tying it into what Kate said earlier. Like SNAP is vital. And one of the reasons why it's vital is because it allows, they're turning me down. It allows us, the poor folks in the community, to not feel poor because you're receiving something that looks like a credit card that you can go to a regular store and buy or access your food, and you're not standing for an hour and receiving your food from a food pantry. In addition to, again, having the nutritional needs, you get to keep your human dignity from a program like SNAP. So thank you so much for all the work that you do, and thank you for being an awesome advocate for SNAP. So now to the question. So there's another thing that you said during my introduction is that we grew from a $37 million organization to a $210 million organization, but that's not necessarily a good thing. It just means that there's different need, there's more need, and the need is shifting, that there are other people that are suffering that need our help. It also means that people at organizations like Heartland Alliance, and there's a lot of colleagues here from Heartland Alliance and the former Heartland Alliance that saw their organization slowly unravel, and then we had to pick up some of the pieces. And also the Jane Addams Hull House, 14 years ago now, one of the most storied nonprofit organizations in the country, not just Chicago, that filed for bankruptcy, and we ended up being their supporters during that process and picked up a lot of the programming at the time. So it's not necessarily a good thing. It comes as a result of human service organizations that are largely government funded going through struggles because of the bureaucracy of government. So government requires accountability, which it doesn't do well, but it certainly is really terrific at putting in bureaucracy. And so the result of that is you have to hire a lot of people to comply in order to be accountable to the public, to you all. But I'm not sure that it's working so well. Somehow we need to figure out a way that government cuts the red tape. And so it's not necessarily a good thing. But what we end up becoming is this gigantic human service organization led by a lot of people who have seen poverty, and it's still in our rearview mirror. And I think that's important, that people like myself understand poverty from, at its roots, and then try to support other people in kind of stepping out of poverty like we have. But you need to understand this, even though I am certainly not considered to be in poverty now, but we see it in the rearview mirror in a way that I think most people in this room can't understand that. And so it's important to have people like us who work in the sector that have experienced it. Now to the question. So we, and I'll promise to be brief, this is probably the most important. So we provide services from education, economic stability, something we call emotional wellness, which is mental health and behavioral health services, and finally empowerment. So education, early childhood education. We're one of the largest providers of early education services in the city, one of the premier providers of adult education services in the city, and they're both at risk. There are Head Start programs across the country that are closing their doors because they didn't know if the government was going to pay them their next their next grant amount. And so they acted preemptively and they just shut their doors. We have the wherewithal and the line of credit, and I see my partners at Northern Trust over there with the Northern Trust to feel secure that we can pay and sustain until this government shutdown would be over. But there's a limit to everything. We're one of the great providers of that. In the area of emotional wellness, so we're one of the largest providers of mental health and behavioral health services in our region. We're also one of the largest providers of domestic violence services in the region, if not the largest, most comprehensive provider. Nobody really knows that we do that, but that's one of the things that we do. We have the Legal Aid Society. We run the second oldest legal aid clinic in the country. Predates Loyola University, predates Loyola University's clinics. We helped found Northwestern University and University of Chicago's legal aid clinics that they run now. Were founded in 1857, the organization. The Legal Aid Society merged with us about 25 years later, and Miguel Caberline, who leads that for us, is here today. We used to provide what people call poverty law, but really what that means is we're a small law firm that provides justice for everybody who come through our doors. And it could be you're a victim of domestic violence and you need support at the courthouse, or that you need support through a divorce process. We do that. If you're losing your housing benefits, your Section 8, for example, benefits, that we would come in, step in there and make sure that you don't lose it, so you don't step into poverty even more, because now you're housing insecure, not just hungry. So we do those kinds of things. And we provide probably the premier provider of human trafficking services in the state of Illinois, in support of people like that. So we do that. And then recently, we've been involved in violence prevention. So all that you've been hearing about violence today, we have a hand in it, but only since 2017. So what is a fact today is that we have seen the fewest number of homicides and shootings in the city of Chicago in the last 60 years. And that's before the federal intervention. We were trending in that direction. And since the federal intervention, we probably have seen a little bit more violence because people are on edge as the federal agents have come into our neighborhood. So we've seen that. If you ask me additional questions, I'll tell you what that work means. But essentially, it's we're taking credible messengers, people who have backgrounds, felony backgrounds, who have turned their life around, and we do background checks, not the HR background checks. We do those, but street checks to make sure that they actually did leave their gang or street organization and are on the mend. Some of these people have written books about their transformation. Some of these people are ministers now, and if you ever want to see human transformation, and I invite everybody here today, I'll get the cue, everybody here today to come to one of our graduations of our Peace Academy. It is human transformation in action. You can see it. You can see how it's happening. So I'm going to stop there and then give Josh an opportunity to tell us about his work.
I need to do a follow-up though. Across that range of work, especially community violence, the good news, maybe before the recent, what are some of the biggest sort of levers that you've seen work across the last 2 decades for actually changing the tide? And what have you learned are the critical pieces for making a community going from downward to sort of optimism and hope? Because that movement from fear to hope is profound, and it's critical for turning a community around. And so what have you learned about that through your work?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Sally. The levers are simple. They're so complicated to implement. They're simple, I think, to understand. You marry data, like all the data scientists out there to tell us how this work should be done. You look at the studies that have been going on in the city of Chicago for about 50 years, first through Irving Spergel, and then who was at the University of Chicago, probably still the most cited scholar at the Department of Justice, back when the Department of Justice used to fund this kind of stuff. look at that data, see how it's evolved, see how the organizations that have come through Cure Violence and the others that were giant players in the space, see what they have done, learn from their work, expand on that work, and try to professionalize it. So the key for us is to professionalize the field of street outreach. And so we've created something called the Metropolitan Peace Academy, where we have people, and so far about 50 organizations across Chicagoland and as far as East St. Louis, Lincoln, and Rockford, because Rockford has a higher incidence of gun violence than we do, and nobody knows that. But they come here, they train, and we try to train to a baseline so that everybody has a baseline level of understanding. So you marry science with partnership across 50 groups. We partner specifically with 14, and we are an umbrella organization over those 14, in partnership with those 14. And then we partner with Arnie Duncan and his CRED organizations, and with several other organizations, Ready Chicago and other initiatives, come to one table and try to keep that baseline going. And importantly, the communication across the entities, and then have true partnership with community. We're also partnering with police. Police train at the Metropolitan Peace Academy, and they learn what it takes to keep peace in communities from community residents, not just from a police academy. And so all those things I think are the key.
What I've learned from this model and others is it's one neighborhood at a time, and it's getting all these partners together at the table, as you so effectively do. And it's like the patience to be there one day at a time. Because like even Kate, you were talking about the food. I'm gonna let you tell the DeSalle food pantry story, Josh, when we turn to you. But you were talking about how you were looking for a partner in the community where the Francis DeSalle School is. And you discovered they used to run a food pantry, and it was figuring out how to partner with Big Shoulders and the local school to make something happen. But it's focusing in at that level of the specific neighborhood and what kind of intervention is needed. And I think that's a beautiful example. All right, Josh, you are gonna have to be the guy who brings your unique charisma to the table to talk about, and you'll talk about.
You started because it was about me, like, shut the microphone. That was on.
But Josh, you have really thought, what does it take?
Yeah, both the microphones can't be off, yeah.
All right. Josh, you've spent a lot of time with Big Shoulders. Think about what does it really take to provide education in some of the most highest poverty areas in our city. And it often is not public education. It turns out that those legacy Catholic schools are trusted and people are ready to partner with them, but you've got to make sure they have the resources they need to succeed. And you have learned more than anybody about what those resources for success look like in education at the local neighborhood level. So help us understand what you've learned from Big Shoulders and Big Shoulders Plus about education in some of the highest poverty neighborhoods.
Thank you for the question. And just to echo my fellow panelists here, it's really great to be here with all of you today. And I, sitting as they were talking, three tough people to follow. I was just thinking about all the people in this room who were bothered enough by what's going on in this moment in our city and our nation to take time away to come to a room and to think about how we can all continue to activate. But so many of you are already involved, engaged. Both Kate and Rick mentioned that, of helping to address this issue. And it's that force for good, I think, that is almost emotional, that, that we will overcome, we will succeed, we will break through this. And one of the comments that Rick made, that he said that, growth in our organizations isn't necessarily good because that means that there are challenges arising. But I'd just like to point out on the other side of that, I would say, because I grew up, I moved to Chicago almost 25 years ago, and Big Show's 20 years. And I kind of grew up with Kate and Rick and watching them build their organizations. And I would say they've grown, but they've grown more in how they're smarter about addressing these issues. And you talked about the data and partnerships and connecting dots to be more effective, that in a silo, we're ineffective. Collective, we are deeply impactful. And both of these folks and their teams have done that, and I hope that we at Big Shoulders Fund are trying to be more data-driven and more thoughtful. I mean, the number one way to succeed in this is to listen to community every day and twice on Sunday. That's where the answers are. And the second is better data and information to identify and really support those needs. So great honor to be here with all three of you. But in terms of, kind of the educational challenges that so many of these communities face and what we've kind of learned at Big Shoulders Fund, that's a long speech, so I'm gonna tie in very closely. But I would say that coming into this, that, what both, everybody's kind of talking about is these are neighborhoods with historic disinvestment. And it wasn't like there's not talent in some of these communities. That talent was too often not connected to opportunities. That schools didn't have the supports, the programs that they needed that more affluent communities have in connecting students. And we've all seen it to opportunity that we unleash talent. And so sad to think about all the lost talent, but how do we continue to connect the talent that is there today to more opportunities? And I would say also we've learned at Big Shoulders Fund is that these schools are ultimately community-based organizations. Forgetting what they do from 6 in the morning till 6 at night in terms of academics, they are seen as beacons of hope. There's been research done on our Big Shoulder Fund schools and how they add to social cohesion when they remain open and they detract from it when they close. That they are platforms where other services, are trusted facilities, buildings, humans that lead them because they've been there for generations. And so the ability to partner with either one of their organizations or so many others to bring other services is a no-brainer. And our students that we support, I mean, primarily south and west side of Chicago, up in Waukegan, are facing all the issues that, lack of access to stable food supply or social emotional needs, housing, go down the list. These are the realities of the very schools we work with, and we are suited for that, so we partner with other organizations. And what we see is when we connect these students to those supports in these schools, they accelerate, and so our outcomes are significant. That's not the purpose of today. I think it is more about the partnership and how we address these issues. And I want to call out one in particular that I think amplifies the importance of how we work together, being smarter about how we find partners and enable local leaders to show us how to really get things done. And this happened, in some ways, I kind of found out about it. And I think, Kate, you probably knew about it at some point, but your team in identifying what partners, how do we get food out in different parts of the city? The southeast side of the city is a wonderful community. I've come to love the southeast side of Chicago. It is a neighborhood who owns their community, who fights for their community, who works together to solve issues. Isn't that what we should all be doing? Not pointing, but saying, how do we solve these issues? And so when they were looking at different neighborhoods to work with, Greater Chicago Food Depository said, there was a place we used to work with, St. Francis de Sales Parish, there's a school there. And what they found was an amazing leader, Dr. Ronnie Fasten, who's a principal and CEO there. It's embarrassing to say this, but Dr. Ronnie Fasten was a student and a scholar in Big Shoulders Fund when I first started. So I remember in elementary school and high school, and so it's a little embarrassing, but it goes to show you, the future is in those very seats in the very classrooms that will carry us forward. And Dr. Ronnie Fasten had gone off and been successful in lots of different teaching places and in administrative leadership and said, I want to go back to my community. And she became the principal and CEO. In fact, the first year when she started, she went door to door to welcome new families into the school because she knew the neighborhood, she grew up there. And so the Greater Chicago Food Depository said, we partner with you. It's a student-run food pantry on a regular basis. And they give out tons of food over time. I don't know the exact amounts, but lots of food. I go down there and we bring other volunteers to support, to watch these students who run the whole thing under the leadership of Dr. Ronnie Fasten. And so this past Saturday, when in this chaos that we're living in, the loss of SNAP and people needing access to food, unbelievably frustrating, but I went down to that school, saw Kate, her team, Dr. Ronnie Fasten, her students managing the program, her students welcoming in community members. To Kate's point, some of them 80s plus, 10 years old, 6 years old. Talk about humbling. Talk about incredibly sad and emotional to watch that, but so uplifting to see these children helping them to come into the building, getting them down the hall, then carrying their things out to someone to pick them up, or a bus or whatever, however they were leaving. So when I think about community-based organizations, our schools certainly there to educate, but even more, they are there to partner with other organizations to meet the needs of those students, but also the communities. And collectively, we are stronger when we work together.
One of the things that you were,
Getting emotional here, I'm sorry about that.
you told a beautiful story though about how they're managing inventory, they're managing ordering, they're learning about how to stock shelves and, you know, get the SKUs arrayed. Like what I loved about that story was they were learning concrete,
Yes.
you know, sort of business commercial skills while meeting a social need and creating a partnership between your organizations. I thought that was just an unbelievable, and
By the way, Dr. Ryan Cash is.
yeah, please, yeah. It is mesmerizing to meet these leaders and talk to these leaders. And you can see part of what's been so wonderful about my job. Catholic Charities is amazing, but what's even equally and triply amazing, like in the whole thing being synergistic, is the partners you get to work with and the amazing innovations and ideas that are around the city. We want to offer a chance for you guys to ask questions because it's already been a good chunk of time just listening to incredible stories about how we think about poverty and how we meet it here in our city. What questions do we have from the audience? So do we have mic runners? Yeah, Jamie's got one and we can always supplement up here. So please, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. Well, right back there.
All right, Davis, maybe you won't either, but I'll try. Ms. Maher, you mentioned that things like parish food pantries aren't going to be the source of the solution with 900,000 people short of food. Do you have a model of what would be the solution to food hunger from all the way from the top government all the way down to the street level as to what would work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. And I want to be clear. I think there is a role. We are likely always going to need food pantries because we all need help from time to time. I don't know a human being who doesn't. And so I think it's reasonable to think that there needs to be a collective of charitable institutions who can rise up and support neighbors in a moment of crisis. But I don't think it can be the sustaining solution. And for us at the Food Depository, that's really what has led us on a journey to go back to our roots. We were founded by a group of advocates who were worried in the 1970s because they already saw that the food stamp program was not strong enough. And we grew and we became a charitable food distribution organization, and we've now come full circle and we realize that we have to be fierce advocates. We need to advocate for better education so that people graduate from institutions of learning being able to be qualified for jobs that are available to them. We need to advocate for jobs that pay thriving wages. We need to advocate for a safety net that works. I will just say, during COVID, which was a heavy and dark time, something extraordinary happened in this country. Very quickly after the pandemic began, Congress acted and they put into place a series of expansions in the safety net. In particular, they expanded the SNAP program and they expanded the child tax credit. Child poverty plummeted to its lowest levels ever in our lifetime. We saw that it works. But we have to be willing to make that investment. And to me, that means we have to lift our voices. There are a huge set of collective societal costs if we don't. And so being advocates, looking for solutions through policy and through investments in the safety net really, I believe, is the solution that will drive food security across the nation.
We had a few questions online, so I'm gonna say one and raise your hand if you have a question and I'll come find you for the next. What can we do to help, from Julia? Donations, talking to our representatives, volunteering at a site?
Yeah, the answer to that one's really quick, and it's all of the above, but we've spent a lot of time talking about hunger and food benefits, but before coming here, I'm not an expert on Medicaid per se. We provide, but we get Medicaid reimbursement, which means we're better at making sure that we have the clinicians to provide the service, et cetera. But in preparation for this, I set our friend Grace Ho a note and said, hey, listen, I'm gonna be on this panel, and just in case they ask about Medicaid, could you send me a couple of slides? And so I think that we need to share this so that as you think about Medicaid, I bet most of us don't even know what it is. We just hear about Medicaid and we have a sense for what it is. But as you think about it, bear this in mind. So at the end of 2024, over 3.4 million Illinoisans were enrolled in Medicaid, and that's at risk of being cut. So who are the Medicaid customers? 44% of those Medicaid customers are children, 9% are seniors, 7% are adult with disabilities. And so who's covered by Medicaid? And I'm just going to jump through it really quickly. Medicaid covered approximately 68% of all nursing facility days in Illinois. So think about Medicaid, that's what we're talking about. 50% of all births in Illinois are covered by Medicaid. Roughly 80% of people served by community mental health centers like ours are Medicaid customers. 50% of people living with HIV/AIDS, Medicaid, and approximately 60% of community health center patients are Medicaid customers. That's what that last one might have been a little repetitive, but just so you kind of get a sense of what Medicaid is and what's at stake if we start dismantling this.
I said one other thing on that.
Wait.
Just one other thing, because I think certainly we would all say, yes, send checks, send gold bars, send anything. Well, all resources go, and that we're very efficient organizations. I think the one that I think is one of the most critical to the success of all organizations, but certainly I'm talking about ours, is volunteerism. Like, we thrive. Our mission does not succeed, does not continue without heavy doses of volunteerism. And I would say, even my own personal experience, volunteering can sometimes seem intimidating, can seem overwhelming. How can I commit over time? At least in ours, like, how am I going to mentor or tutor a student? How can I, what's the work going to be like at a service day? Or how can I, I'm looking at a few of our principals and our team, that is the lifeblood of our program. Like, our service days, transformational in terms of, that's our janitorial hours. We actually quantify all that time and the impact, the dollars saved, or dollars we didn't have anyway, and that it wouldn't change if we didn't have that. Or professionals coming into classrooms and talking about career. So the stock market program, the law program, the entrepreneurial program. And again, it seems intimidating, but the ability to go into a classroom and to change, because if you haven't seen it, it's hard to imagine it. And so helping that. I just think that volunteerism is something we can all do and jump in with. And, I watched down with our food distribution. That wouldn't have happened, certainly without the partnership with Kate and her team, but also the volunteers that showed up to help slug all those boxes and move them around was remarkable. And so, and it's uplifting.
I say yes to everything. We need it all. But what I really want is for people to be awake in this moment. I've just heard from so many people who are feeling the pain, and I get it. It is really hard to see what is happening to our beautiful city and to our neighbors. And I just hear people saying, I can't tune in, I can't watch, I have to take a break from it. And we have to pay attention, and we have to lean in, and we have to care, and we have to love, and we have to be joyful, and we have to be positive, and we cannot allow the negativity to seep into our minds or our hearts or our work. There are a couple of you who have heard this story from me, but one of the most important things that happened to me in my work in the first week of June of 2020, immediately after the video of George Floyd's murder had been released. I was in a community conversation in Englewood. It was the pandemic. We were trying, a little bit like we are right now, to get people to stand up emergency food distributions. And so I was out doing my best to try to convince a group of community organizations that yes, they really did want to do an emergency distribution. And we were sort of dangling, well, you know, if you do that, maybe you can become a full-time food pantry. And there was this young man whose name I do not, if I knew it, I have forgotten it, but I will never forget him. He got up and he was so angry. He was a young Black man, maybe 18 years old. I won't say exactly what he said because it was, there are words in there that I probably shouldn't use at a lunch like this, but the gist of it was he slammed his hands on the table and he said, I don't want a food pantry. I want justice. Isn't that what we all want? And so in this moment, do we need to show up? Yes. Do we need to volunteer? Do we need to provide food and make sure that schools are thriving, beautiful places where students learn? Absolutely. But we also have to want justice. I don't want a world where food pantry lines exist. I don't want a world where we are having to make these decisions about, do I get my Medicaid support or do I put food on the table? Like that is a fundamental lack of justice. And I feel like that is really what I want, is for people to want justice and to fight for it. So we have to lift our voice. We have to pay attention to what's going on. We have to be curious and ask the questions of why. Why? And unfortunately, it comes back to a long, long history of disinvestment. And we have to challenge ourselves on that as well. So we wanted to.
I think if there's anything I keep hearing over and over again, volunteerism, donations, those things matter. But if we're going to be responsible citizens, we have to advocate. And it's both voting, but it is down there pushing the issues, pushing our representatives on Medicaid, on SNAP, on educational funding. These things you can't give up and you've got to go over and over. One of the things we think a lot about in social psychology is this very simple, there are two very simple switches in our heads as human beings that we've learned. One is between fear and hope. And they can call it that, you know, it's that abundance mindset versus scarcity, whatever you want to call it. But the way you solve a problem, the way you engage with a hard problem is fundamentally different when you choose hope over fear. It is the most potent override on human behavior to say, I will be hopeful rather than fearful in the face of an external threat. We can show the data over and over again. Your cognition is faster, your generosity, your altruism, how you reach out, how you listen to others. All of it is fundamentally changed with this little switch, which we can all do in our own brains, of choosing hope and engagement over fear, and then the disengagement because the fear becomes overwhelming. And so that notion of hope versus fear is incredibly important. And the other little switch that I learned about was the difference between me versus us. And it is amazing. I had a whole doctoral dissertation on how subtly you can word things to get you in a frame of me versus us. But that difference, again, how you problem solve, how you engage, how you even process the same information that you're getting. When I am thinking about Rick and I have two organizations that sit in the same space together, and we can either be partners in that space or we can be competitors, right? But we're going to do a whole lot better for the world when we're partners across this whole table of things. And so as you listen to these things, it's about advocacy, and in advocacy, it's about choosing hope and us over fear and protecting me. And I just like, and you can, every single person in this room can control those two switches.
And if you talk about those two switches, because a lot of what these guys are talking about is an individual choice to choose hope and us over fear and me. And you guys inspire me every day. Can I just say that? Like, are you guys not like blown away by this week? Rick, I know you wanted to make a plug for United for Chicago.
Yeah, I just want to tell people what this is. So in this dialogue that we're having today in the country about immigration and the federal actions, federal government actions that we're seeing across the region, it's not only in Chicago, they're in Aurora, North Chicago, all over the place, Elgin. So a lot of nonprofits and philanthropic organizations, education institutions, have pretty much taken the stance of, hey, we're not changing our values, but we're also not going to trigger, actions against us. So that essentially kind of silenced a lot of organizations. And so what Kate and Sally and Josh and I are saying is, don't be silent during this moment. And I'll give you a way to maybe it's easier for you to be vocal. So we started an initiative called United for Chicago, and it's a bipartisan or nonpartisan group of business leaders primarily, also civic leaders and some faith leaders. They allowed me to be in it as a nonprofit leader, I think largely because I was one of the organizers of the event. But it's former Secretary of Education Arnie Duncan, myself, and Andrea Science although she's kind of a silent partner, were the instigators behind this. But we were able to get, originally, we used to say over 30 of the most prominent business leaders, Black, white, Latino, in the city of Chicago to stand with us at a press conference on Friday. And Sally was there representing Catholic Charities. And essentially give 3 messages. And I'm going to tell you what happened as a result. So the first message is, hey, we don't agree on everything here, especially because we're bipartisan, right? We certainly don't agree on immigration policy, but we do agree on this. We agree that these tactics that are being deployed by ICE are inhumane and they need to stop. 2, we also agree that what they're doing here, it's bad for business. Not only in the Latino neighborhoods and the immigrant neighborhoods, but for the entire city of Chicago. And there are documented factual ways how it's impacting our city and our state's economy. And finally, that we're standing united for Chicago. That means with our neighbors, and it means all of them. Since the press conference, it's not only those 30+ leaders, but now we have over 50 CEOs and organizations that have signed on. There was a full-page ad in the Tribune on Sunday, and you'll see more. And it is bipartisan, nonpartisan, and you have some of the wealthiest billionaire Republicans standing with us, and some more left-leaning organizations, business leaders standing with us. So if that, the result we think happened is people looked around the room like, oh, okay, they believe that, then maybe I should believe this too, or agree to that premise. And so it's called United for Chicago. If you're interested in more, let Sally know, let any of us know, and we'll send you some information on it. But I stand United for Chicago.
Great. Thank you all for your time. Thank you all for coming together in the spirit of hope, in the spirit of faith in something bigger and more profound, in the dignity of each human being, and the idea of our lives need to stand for something. And the something, I think these folks can inspire all of us about how we want to make our lives stand for something when it comes to making our city even greater, even stronger, and having much bigger shoulders. So thank you for being here today. And most of all, thank you, my amazing partners. Thank you.